Welcome everybody to the September 13th, 2021 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote participation by board members and members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item, the public hearings, of which we have none tonight, and any other matter for which the board allows public participation will be by the Zoom Q&A or raise hand feature. When using Q&A to ask a question or make a comment, your comment or question will be read and responded to at an appropriate point in the proceedings. If you have raised your hand on Zoom, you will be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. And because at least one board member is participating remotely, every vote will be taken by roll call. Please note that this meeting is being recorded as well as being broadcast live on the Grafton Community Television Government Channel. And to begin the meeting, we'll call the roll of all the members. Bob Hassinger.
Here.
Linda Hassinger.
Here.
Prabhu Venkatraman.
Here.
Justin Wood.
Here.
David Robbins here, and Maura McCormick, the associate member.
Here.
Great, we are all here. And our first agenda item, as always, is public input. There are no members of the public present in the room, nor on Zoom. But if any of the Zoom participants have something that would qualify as a public input, now would be the time to speak to an issue that's not otherwise on the agenda. Seeing none, we have one action item on tonight's agenda, and that would be the town's right of first refusal to purchase, given the notice of intent to sell Chapter 61A land at 116 Upton Street. I guess we can start with, Chris can give us any background or information about this, such as when it was submitted, what the deadlines are, that type of thing.
Yep, so we did receive the, I have to look at the date. I believe it was received
It was stamped September 2nd.
Friday. Yeah, okay. September 2nd. And so this is the 61A for 116 Upton Street. This is a right of first refusal to purchase. They are intent to sell, so we do have the 120-day, the select board has the 120-day deadline, of which we provide the recommendation. There has been review by Grafton Land Trust, which expressed some interest, as well as I believe the Assessor's Department has expressed similar interest, as there is some abutting conservation land with significant trails and conservation benefits to be had. I do not believe conservation has reviewed this yet or issued a formal letter.
Okay, this did come to our attention back in April for a brief informal discussion for which no conclusion was reached because we recognized at the time that no formal notice has been received. Just a couple of observations about the land. It's approximately 16 acres in total with two frontages, as you can see in the diagram, two separate frontages on the Upton Street. This is the old Upton Street alignment, not the current 140 alignment. Frontage is about 360 feet and 538 feet. The lot is largely wooded with some fields. If you look at the on the town's GIS with the wetlands overlay, you'll see that there's a stream that roughly bisects the property, as well as some wetlands on the west or the western edge of the property. I will note that it is in the A zone, which is 2 acres residential. It could accommodate a subdivision of as many as 7 lots if the wetlands and topography allow full development. The wetlands that are shown on the map, if that's reasonably accurate, may reduce the development potential by some amount. I also noticed that it's bordered to the south by a trapezoidal piece of land owned by Pease, the other side of which borders the railroad. to the south. I'm not sure, it's not south. Well, yeah, I guess it is more or less. But anyway, on the picture here, the lower left-hand is the Pease property. The lower right property is owned by Ellis. Largely, both those are largely wooded. The Ellis land also has some wetlands shown on it. Note for the record that the purchase and sale agreement is for $500,000, which is the price the town would have to match in order to purchase this. So having said that much, I would love to hear comments or ideas from the board. Any thoughts, any recommendations?
Yeah. As much as I can make out here, the $500,000 is buying the acreage and a house and maybe a couple of other buildings. So a large portion of the total cost is for the structures rather than the land. And also the chapter protection should not have included at least the minimum requirement. Forgotten whether it's forgotten exactly how much it is. Maybe 2 acres around the house and for the house. So I'm wondering what the situation there is. We certainly don't want to be buying the house or raising money to buy the house. Maybe you sell it somehow in a deal, but I'd like to know about whether this is a legitimate challenge to us because of the way some of the land is used and what some of the cost is. I don't think the chapter, no, because we have the situation. We don't quite have the right amount of land around the house to still leave enough acreage to be qualified. So I just wonder how that works. I can see some value in maintaining as much open space there as possible. You have the other lots adjacent to this one, and the one on the lower right at one time was proposed for a cell tower before one got built across Browns Road from it. It's a little hilly in there, as I recall.
Has
Chris,
this been,
can we find out any, or do we know anything about that?
Yeah, I can look. That seems to align with some of the more, what the Grafton Land Trust was discussing. I think their intent as well is not to obviously take over the house. I believe that's more in terms of the trail systems around and the abutting conservation land. I think their interest is in potentially working with the seller or even the purchaser, if they are to purchase this property, to set aside a portion of the land for that trail and conservation use. I don't know exactly how that fits in the context of this right of first refusal. That would be a question for town council, and I can work with Evan to see if we can get that opinion rendered from them. But I think that's a little bit beyond my expertise to comment on.
My thing is, we shouldn't, when we look at the price that we're talking about, we should be able to not have to look at the price and not have to pay the price for the house, or else what are the options? Because this is, usually it's open land that we're looking at. So that, and certainly if the land trust is interested, we're perfectly happy to see them come into it, I would think.
for whatever it's worth, there actually is no directly abutting conservation land. There is a directly abutting 61B parcel. There is land trust land that comes close. You know, the one corner of a piece of land trust land. It's a small triangle on the north side of the railroad tracks. The corner of that comes within maybe a couple 100 feet, 100 or 2 feet of this. But that's as close as any dedicated conservation land comes to this, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, well, I think this is the only time you're going to have a chance to accumulate some of the pieces that would go into that. In the future, then maybe other things will develop. But if you pass it up now, who knows? By the way, some of their frontage appears to be on Upton Street rather than Upton Street. You know what I mean?
Yes, a portion of the frontage is on the Upton Street that we generally know as Route 140. So there is a portion of it there.
I'd like the town to someday figure that out and do something about that. It can be confusing. Of course, we already have an old Upton Street, don't we? So
We do.
so maybe this is old Upton
So you
Street.
could, I suppose you could be really picky and say we have an old Upton Road and we have an Upton Street. So we could have an old Upton Street at risk of being quite confusing in terms of street names.
I don't think the fire department or the dispatchers would really appreciate that.
No, I think we have enough trouble with Leland Hill and Leland Street and Leland Avenue.
In different parts of the town.
I think we have some places where one end of the road is marked with one thing like road, and at the other end it's marked with something like street.
I
Or
wouldn't be
at other
surprised.
places along in the way. What is it? And off of Adams Road, the little thin road.
Hay Mountain.
No. Off of Adams Road. Goes back past the farms.
Oh,
Where the cell tower? Where the
yeah. Estabrook.
Estabrook. I think Estabrook may show up like that.
Anyway, do we have, does anybody care to propose a recommendation for the board to make? Or would you rather defer a recommendation until questions about purchasing the houses and how that fits in? We could defer that until that question is resolved.
Yeah, I'm interested in the council's answers for that.
Yeah, because I think there is enough interest and enough potential so that we ought to give it the chance it can have.
And just also for future consideration, thinking about what could happen with this land. If the town does not purchase the land, the intended use for the purchaser, according to the PNS, is residential, but otherwise unspecified. But if it should come to pass that a subdivision is built here, it could very well be built as a flexible development subdivision, and a substantial portion of that, particularly the portion that seems to be of more interest, could likely end up being donated to the town as open space. Somewhat similar in concept to what ended up happening at 59 Pleasant Street. That is, essentially at no cost to the town, a substantial portion of interest as open space could end up being acquired by the town anyway. And quite frankly, with the potential of there being no cost for the town, that's worth keeping in mind. But I think I'm getting the sense for tonight that the board would prefer to defer a recommendation until such time as we have a better handle on, what the town would actually be purchasing here.
If somebody is pushing to get any input, we can say that there's enough potential here to at least look into it. But we think, if we have good thoughts about the land.
Based on what I know tonight, I would be inclined not to recommend purchasing it, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, I'd like to have some answers on that though first.
Yep. So I think we'll take that as
Yes,
conclusion of the discussion this evening is to defer a recommendation from the board until we can specifically get answers to the question that Bob raised about how much of this purchase is actually properly covered under 61A.
It may turn out that that's already known somewhat, just we aren't privy to it.
asking the town for money for buying land is not easy. We need
No,
to do
in fact, I think I would,
all of our work.
I would feel very strongly in saying that I don't believe this land is worth $500,000 for the town to purchase.
But
I would strongly recommend against that.
yeah,
But we
What
don't
about-
know that for sure at this point. So let us move on then, unless there's anything else anybody wants to say on the 116 Upton. Moving on to our discussion items, is there any update on the complete streets, Chris?
So there is. I did draft the first draft of a complete streets policy. I circulated it to staff, most notably DPW. I'm awaiting comments back from them before planning board takes a crack at it, and then we'll ship that off to select board once we've gotten comfortable with it. Basically, the first draft, what I did is I looked at some neighboring communities, some nearby communities, and used some of the language included in their policies, tailored it to Grafton's context. They also provide model policy language in the guidance document provided by the state, which is from other communities. It's part of how I identified communities that had good policies. So I used that language as well, and again tweaked it to Grafton's context. Added in some things that I felt would be beneficial from my experience. So I think the first draft will be pretty comprehensive. Part of the challenge in writing it is that they do score the policy, and we need to make 80 points out of that scoring rubric in order to move on. Otherwise, it comes back to us. The way I have it written, by using the model language and other communities that have scored highly, I think we'll, I don't think we'll get 100. I don't know of any community that has achieved the 100, but I hope to be close. And I think it's a really comprehensive policy. If I do not hear back from DPW shortly, I will still circulate it to the board as is, and we can kind of work on that in tandem. I know DPW is very busy, so but I'd like to keep pushing while we have the momentum. So that's my update on that. I will likely be asking when we go to the select board that they also, even though we'll be kind of finalizing a potential policy, issue a notice of intent. What that does is that will allow us, while the state is reviewing our policy before the board adopts it and doing that scoring criteria, we can actually just jump right into tier 2 funding. The only criteria is that the select board would then have to adopt a policy within 1 year. So in terms of timelines, it just kind of lets us again kind of move the ball while the state is reviewing the policy and giving us comments back. But
Well, what's the approval process now? Do we do something? The select board does something?
no, it's the select board. So the select board is they'll be kind of the authority of complete streets. What I wanted to do is just I wanted to put it before the planning board just as a a matter of, you know, another set of eyes, and also looking at, obviously the complete streets policies will be inclusive to all other boards and approvals, and so getting some local board input on the policy before it goes to the select board, I thought would be helpful. You know, we could just send that to the select board, but I think anything coming with, you know, the recommendation and backing of the planning board always gives it a little bit more kind of backing. So
Anything else from anybody on the board, complete streets? Moving on then, Mill Redevelopment Overlay District is still in the hands of CMRPC. I'm assuming we haven't heard anything back from them as of yet.
no, not of yet. Yeah, so it's still ongoing. What I'll also do in the meantime, I know that they did send, and as part of our attached materials, the model bylaw language, and what I'll do is I'll be going through that over the coming weeks as well. I know that they're also reviewing that and doing some updates per our comments. But I'll take another look at that and really start to draft up language for Springtown meeting so that we can be set to go if we are comfortable with the bylaw as it's amended.
You said they're sent along more stuff that's in our. I see the document, but that's dated
Yeah,
February 10th, 2020.
so nothing new. So, no,
Okay.
yeah. So the I believe they had model bylaw language in that though.
There is.
Yeah, and so I'm going to take another. I had reviewed it briefly, but I want to take another look in
Just making
advance
sure
of them.
we weren't missing anything.
No, so
Okay, that's it for that topic.
yes.
Subdivision rules and regulations update. So we have, a few days ago, I circulated a draft 6 for review by the board. And I've received some very helpful comments from Bob. And I think before we get into that, there was one sort of topic left over from our last discussion, which was a proposal from Jeff Walsh about allowing vertical curves within the leveling zone. And the board was interested in seeing an illustration of that. So this afternoon, Jeff forwarded to me and Chris a couple of diagrams to illustrate that. If you could maybe bring one of those up on the screen, Chris. Hopefully, yeah, you got a copy of that, right?
I believe so.
Cool.
Yes.
All right, so this is probably a good. Jeff gave us two diagrams that are largely similar, but this one probably is I like this one better. It's an illustration of basically there are two approaches. But what this diagram shows in the line in red, the situation here. Let's take one step back. The situation we're looking at here is an existing road, which is shown at the left-hand diagram, and sort of looking at it head-on with a crown in the road. And then the situation is we're adding a new road off to the side. That's going to the right on this picture. And fundamentally, this road goes downhill from the main road, from the existing road. And what the designer wants to do here is to keep the runoff that's in and around the main road, to keep that runoff from flowing downhill on the new road. And so what they want to do is start the new road with a sloping upwards from the existing road and then curving downwards. So the red line is how that would have to be done with the existing regulations, which doesn't allow any vertical curves within the leveling area, and but it does limit the overall grade in the leveling area. So what he's showing here is a situation with a 1% grade up from the existing road through the leveling area, then starting a vertical curve to end up with a 3% downgrade. So that's the red line in this picture is what's allowed by the existing regulations. The blue line, which is a little bit harder to see, but it's there. The blue line is what would be allowed with Jeff's suggestion, for a vertical curve within the leveling area. So he's showing a 2% grade up within the leveling area for a distance of maybe 50 feet or so, 50 to 75 feet here, with a vertical curve then sloping downwards to that same 3% downgrade. And the difference, I mean, it achieves the same result, and in particular, the reason for selecting a 2% upgrade here is to take sort of the top of that vertical curve and put it at about the same. Jeff's written description says about a 4-inch increase in elevation from the where it joins the main street. So he's showing a slightly steeper curve gradient up from the main road to the vertical curve and then down. Both of these achieve the same result of keeping the runoff, that's the runoff that's basically in the main road. It's keeping that runoff from flowing downhill on the new road. The advantage of having the vertical curve within the leveling area is less fill. You can see the difference in elevation between the blue line and the red line is it's maybe 2 feet or so. So somewhere off to the right-hand side of the screen, you don't see it on the diagram, but eventually, both of these downward gradients meet the land at some point where it levels off or flattens out. But the difference, what Jeff's proposal allows, is for this result to be achieved with less fill. There's the other diagram that he supplied. I should email that out to everybody. But the other diagram is similar, except it's the blue line is also a 1% slope. It just doesn't have to go back as far. In both cases, what allowing the vertical curve within the leveling area achieves is allows the road to be built with less fill. And of course, this isn't applicable to all situations. This is a particular set of circumstances, where this would make sense.
Yeah. The problem is that you have a greater slope where you intersect the road you're connecting to. 2% instead of 1% in that drawing.
Yeah.
And
which may or may not be a problem, but the other drawing,
This one or the other one?
I've got the other drawing on my screen if you want me to share my screen.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Let's see, share a screen. Well, I have to be enabled to share my screen. Yeah, so here's the other situation where instead of increasing that grade from 1% to 2%, it's left at 1%. The advantage of Jeff's proposal is that that the vertical curve can be closer to the existing road. Still, going 1% up just far enough to achieve the necessary control of the runoff, but with the ability to start that vertical curve within the leveling zone, then you don't have to go so far out with that vertical curve.
does this only apply where the new road slopes down, Because the equations, the calculations have both the case of
Yeah.
down and up, don't they? They cover
Yes, it would in principle apply with a slope in the other direction. It's probably less likely that it would be needed in that, in the situation where the road slopes up from the main road. And I think the one case, sort of inverting this thing, there might be a case for sloping down away from the existing road for a little while before sloping up. There may be an engineering case in some cases for, in that case, keeping runoff farther away from the main road. It's not so clear to me, and Jeff didn't address that case. And it's, just in general, there are probably a lot of cases where it wouldn't make any difference. There would be no motivation to put the vertical curve within the leveling area. But the situation Jeff drew here is one case where it can make sense. But yeah, the rule will be symmetric, and it would apply in the other direction as well.
The other thing I'm not quite sure about is what this does for sightlines, visibility for vehicles on both roads. You get, as you come up the green line, you get closer to the intersection before as much of you shows, and likewise you probably see a bit less on the road you're intersecting with. You know what I'm saying?
I think I know what you're saying, but I don't think it is really applicable to this particular portion of what we would modifying in the rules, where the sight line should still be reasonable and maintained, and if you can't meet them, then that is something they would need to adjust anyway.
Yeah.
This is in particular control the runoff.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about in the vertical plane. We usually talk about the horizontal plane for sight lines, but I'm
Yeah.
saying as you come up the 3%, the red grade, the top there restricts your view of cars on the road you're approaching until you get up more or less on top of it.
Yes, and you would, even if we were to allow the vertical curve within the leveling zone, other considerations, particularly regarding sight lines, would still be applicable. So the fact that you would be allowed to do something like this within the leveling zone doesn't mean that you can do it in a way that causes sightline problems or other problems.
Do we get an analysis of what I was just asking about?
For sight
Or
lines.
is our equation supposed to cover that?
Are the vertical curve parameters, in particular the K value, in conjunction with the changes in grade and everything else, that is designed to avoid sightline problems as you are approaching the vertical curve from either direction. Now, the potential complication here would be as you are approaching the intersection, where you're not only are you worried about the vertical sight lines going up and down over the curve, which our existing vertical curve rules address fully, but you now also have to think about, and I don't know that in practice there would be any further consideration needed, but you would have to give some thought to if the vertical curve was too close to the intersection and too much of a change in grade, you could conceivably have a sightline problem. Given the limits on vertical curves that we already have and various existing guidelines for sightlines, I don't know that we have to add any new rules or make any provisions in the rules specifically to cover that situation.
First of all, you said that our rule completely covers it. I'm not sure I know, except that we picked a K value Um, and maybe that's adequate, but the drawing that you showed at 3%, didn't it, the other drawing went from 1% to 3%?
Are you meaning the 2%?
Which is where we sort of deal with that.
Let's see, we've got, where is that other,
I'll pull it up if you want.
Yeah, the green line is now 3% instead of 1%.
2% actually. But yeah, that's,
Twice as much.
Yeah.
So you're changing that parameter, the way that parameter works.
well, you're not changing, I mean, the K value, the K value is the same there. And, you know, the distance, the total distance of the vertical curve, let's see, here with a change in grade of 5, and the K value of 28, the length of the vertical curve is 140. And
In red, it's 112. It looks like.
the other one is, yes, on the other where it was a 1% on the 1% to 3%, then the same K value gets you 112. So the K value dictates with a greater change in grade from +2 to -3, the K value dictates a greater total length of the vertical curve. And as I said, those K values are designed, set specifically to avoid vertical sight distance problems on vertical curves. That comes from the Mass Highway Project Development and Design Guide.
You know, well, I don't think I'm going to be satisfied. So let's just say okay and tell on.
My biggest piece to make me okay with it, from what you were concerned about, Bob, is the fact that when we get plans that need us to do sightline, concerns, they show as well the vertical changes along that and how it relates. And if not,
I don't think that we assess that very much now. We just say, do you meet the formula?
Yeah, well,
Actually,
also,
Jeff insists on it being right before it even gets to us.
we also set limits on the vertical, on the grade within the leveling zone. So, and actually within the leveling zone, we allow of course, it's not quite the same thing. We do allow a 3% grade in the leveling zone to a minor street intersection. But that's a sort of a uniform 3% grade. The interesting wrinkle here is the potential for a vertical curve. And when you're going up towards a vertical curve, you don't necessarily see what's on the other side of it. And that's the thing to worry about here. All of which is to say, bottom line is, if we were to allow this, we could consider adding, if necessary, language in the rules and regulations to take into account any sight distance issues that might arise from a vertical curve occurring within, say, 100 feet of an intersection. And I think I'd have to double check the project development and design guide. That may have something to say about it. It doesn't have a lot to say about grades at intersections, but it's worth. In fact, I could even circle back with Jeff and ask him for an opinion on that. But generally speaking, I like the idea of giving more design flexibility here, as it may result in a reduction in cost, a reduction in filling. Avoiding fill is usually considered to be a good thing. So if we can address any potential sightline issues arising from this, which is to say, allow this to the extent that it doesn't create new sightline problems. And that's probably the way to go. That would, rather than trying to work that out tonight, I think it's fair to take that as a concern and figure out how best to address it. But if we generally like the concept, subject to sightline considerations, we can revise the rules, the proposed rules accordingly. But again, with the caveat of making sure that we are able to deal with any sightline issues that might come up due to.
Notice this ends up giving the designer more room to handle his slope. What, the way you've drawn it, or the way this drawing shows, the red and the green lines on the right are the same distance apart all the way down. They're both 3%. But in fact, you might have 2.7% for the green line, so that it ended up at the same place the red line does over on the right. And if it happens that little bit, well, however much it is, happens to come in a place where you're coming with a maximum slope, trying to fit the maximum slope in to build something, this helps them, lets them have more horizontal run to get their vertical distance.
Alternatively, depending on the topography you're dealing with, it might be that to make it work with your topography on what's on the screen now, to make it work, you might have to go greater than 3% on the downward slope on the red line. As you might, if you need to meet the existing topography, you might need a steeper slope with the red line than you do with the green line. So I mean, that's sort of the flip side of what you were just suggesting. It could work either way, but yeah, I think the useful point here is that with a little bit more flexibility, we may allow the designer to get a more comfortable design, either less slopes or less fill or both.
Okay, are we going to do the hearing? We have, yes.
Oh, let's see. Yeah,
past hearing time.
It is past hearing time, and I was going to remember to make this to say this at 7:30. It is now past that time. We've been busy here, but in any case, the hearing was continued to September 27th, not to tonight. It was mistakenly put on the agenda, and somebody, not to name names here, who looked at the agenda didn't notice that when I was asked about the agenda. So it slipped on there by accident, but the announced continuation of this hearing was September 27th. So there is no hearing for tonight. There's no reason to open the hearing because it was never announced for tonight. But it is worth making note for the record that although it did appear on the agenda, that was a mistake.
Yeah, I missed that too until this evening.
Yeah, when I reviewed the agenda last week, I didn't notice it. But then when I was reviewing last night, reviewing stuff for tonight, I noticed it. So, having said that, disposing of our hearing,
Hearing?
so I will follow up on this particular topic of the vertical curves in leveling areas, to see how best we to come up with an idea for resolving the question about vertical sight distances. Or I should say sight distances on vertical curves approaching an intersection. So that's that. Bob, did you want to take time to go through some of the comments you made?
Well, nobody else gets to see them. I really hadn't intended for everybody to worry about it, just to point out those points to you as things that maybe you want to look at or we want to look at. And I don't, maybe it's just me, but I don't completely understand. We have both cul-de-sac and dead end. This is among some related, some of the emphasis on what I noticed. We have both dead end and cul-de-sac in various places. And I'm not sure why or what impact it has, why we have the difference. I think we want to understand that, and at the very least, if there really is a rationale there, be sure that it doesn't take someone smarter than me to figure it out when they read the rules.
Yeah, well, this is why I like other people to read this stuff, because you'll see something that I thought was obvious, or you'll see something that I didn't see. Anyway, but to that point, and several of your points mentioned that, Bob, that to that point, I added the definition of cul-de-sac to distinguish that particular style of dead end from the more generic concept of a dead end, where our concept of dead end basically covers an arbitrarily complex network of streets with just one connection to an existing street, where the term cul-de-sac refers specifically to a street with one end, just a single street, with generally a turnaround of some kind at the end. Now there may be ways that we can make that distinction more clearly, but I worried about the implication in the existing regulations, where the existing regulations frequently return to dead-end streets with a turnaround, and yet our intent, and that could be interpreted to mean that when we say dead-end street, we really mean just a cul-de-sac, just a street terminating in a cul-de-sac, if you want to use that description. Whereas our intent has been, for as long as I can remember and beyond, that we intend the term dead-end street to include something other than just the simple street with a bulb at one end. So I wanted to distinguish those two concepts. Basically, the cul-de-sac is a subset of what dead-end street refers to, and I thought it would be appropriate to have rules about turnarounds specifically attached to the cul-de-sac form of dead end, because that's the only kind of dead end to which it applies.
I don't think I see the difference. Well, part of the difference you're talking about. A cul-de-sac goes from an intersection to an end. A dead-end road goes from an intersection to an end. If you have a cul-de-sac that has an intersection with it, partway up, then the dead end is from that intersection on.
Yep.
And I don't know that it makes any difference.
Well,
Because the distance you measure is from, well, from where you have access, a second access.
yeah.
In any case.
Right. Consider a loop road, one connection to an existing road going some distance to a circle, or a loop of some kind, which we have plenty of examples. That has no end in what you would traditionally think of as an end. In fact, I've specifically added a definition of how you measure that, to take into account the fact that that configuration doesn't have anything that you would logically call an end. And that's basically the distinction here we're trying to draw. Is we're trying to make rules about the bulb at the end that applies only to the configuration where that happens, and also to not imply that that's the only kind of dead end that we're talking about.
Yeah. Don't forget that besides cul-de-sac, we get hammerheads and other things.
Yes,
And in principle, we should never have a dead end where the road doesn't have any turnaround provision. And that includes the temporary case, the 500 feet during a development.
Yep.
We really should require that there's an appropriate turnaround temporarily. Well, for however long the 500 feet are there.
Yeah, it's too dangerous.
So I'm trying to see unified concept. Okay. I have a feeling that this can be unified into a cleaner package, and the thing is that it does come up. We have a case right now, right? Where people argue about this. So getting it right is probably worthwhile. We're not going to solve it here now. I don't even have all of the cases in my head right now. But I think that it can be simplified. You may want to say, there are dead ends with different terminations, if that makes a difference. When the termination style is a bulb, then such and such a rule applies, like for the fire hydrants or whatever. Try to, I don't know. You got to somehow merge the loop road with the ones that don't have, or that aren't a loop.
Yeah, we could take a look at, I can take a look at some alternative possible languages or wordings, but as I said, my objective here was to clarify that there's more than one style that can be called a dead end. Only one of those styles has something that you can call a turnaround, whatever the shape of the turnaround might be. But yeah, there's probably some clarification we can do there.
I think maybe you want to rework it so there's one definition where everything fits into it, that different cases all come under one heading. It seems to be important enough to try to get it a clearer. People will intentionally find the potential interpretation that suits their needs the best. And we can't expect the judge at the court to understand unless we're really good at it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from anybody on that general topic of dead ends? Another excellent point you raised, Bob, was the question about incomplete plans. We want to, generally speaking, reject incomplete plans, but I'm sure I can find some good words for this. Is the plan? A complete plan doesn't necessarily contain every item of information listed. If some of those items are appropriately omitted via a waiver request, so I think we can clarify the language to. And there's a little bit of room for I'm not sure what the term is, but I was going to say weasel wording, but I'm not sure that's right. An applicant can submit a set of plans and information and say, I'm leaving this, and this out because it's not applicable. I'm asking for a waiver for it. If we come back and later say, no, you actually need to submit that, that's sort of, it's some wiggle room there that I don't think we can completely avoid. So I would, maybe I can work with Chris on some good language to use there to make, we want to make sure that we get reasonably complete plans. We don't want them to be able to submit a bare bones and leave almost everything out and say, yeah, that's a valid submission, and you've got X number of days to act on it.
Exactly.
When then we have to go back and forth and try to. So that language in the rules and regulations was intended to avoid that problem. We're not going to give you an out to say you can submit a one-page form and defer all the rest, but by submitting that one-page form, you start at the clock. That's what the language is intended to avoid, and yet we can't on the opposite end say we demand every last scrap of paper that's on the list when half of them might be inappropriate and inapplicable. So it's got to be a way around that, and I think we can do better in the wording than what we've got here.
The thing is that the submission of the plan, the date of a submission of a plan, or our acceptance of it, is a key thing. Among other things, I think it makes a difference as to the zoning. I'm not sure. Well, certainly with respect to our rules. I, the other way to look at it is they've got to get us to agree to the waivers before the clock starts. And that's not real easy either. You have to look at and talk about the project before you can decide whether you want to waive it or not. And actually, it comes down to towards the end of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I want to get in under some deadline, I just put in the piece of paper with, here's my application. Start the clock.
Yeah, so I think we'll have to try to work out some
Yeah.
wording that avoids these. It's almost a sham submission.
Yeah.
But we also want to be able to accept an application that has all the necessary information, but nothing more. Nothing that's we don't want to demand more than we need. So we'll have to work on some language to try to clarify that.
I think you may need some new process. You know what I'm saying? Not just words, but maybe you have to actually have some process. Like I was saying, get some sort of agreement ahead of time that it's reasonable.
Yeah, and I'll say, without the assumption that it needs to be in our rules, we always welcome the developers to come before they formally submit and
Yes.
Give a preliminary conversation and temperature feeling of the board for their idea.
How about if we, maybe they bring the plan in, we don't deem it accepted until we've looked at it and decided that whatever waivers they're asking for are these reasonably on the table. And before saying that the plan is accepted.
Yeah, the rules as written, the rules basically have staff reviewing the application when it's received, and within 14 days responding that it is either complete or not complete, either kicking it back as incomplete or deeming it complete as of the date it was originally submitted. So I think we can work within that framework probably. And
So, I'm looking for the board members though.
if,
No. We might have a different outlook.
Yeah, that gets to be perhaps problematic in terms of having the board review the plans for completeness, essentially, or having the board review the waivers. I think it's probably worth investigating that as a possibility to have sort of a board, at least an initial look at the waivers, saying the waivers seem reasonable. We don't want to introduce a whole lot of delay in the process. That's my concern there.
And as long as we have 3 weeks between meetings, so that could be 21 days minimum.
Yes, and that may or may not be problematic from a legal perspective, but it does seem to me like something we can work on that and try to find a way to get the best feasible way of handling that situation.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else that you wanted to mention, Bob?
Well,
I mean, I'll take all these comments and
yeah. Well, I'm really interested in this. I've been interested since it came up the first time. What happens when you have a cul-de-sac, or anyway, the end of a dead end road? Well, a cul-de-sac with a circle, And then later on, the road is extended. When we have a project that we've been going around on the last few years where that's happening actually. But the properties that front on the circle somehow, I guess, get back the land when the circle's taken out and the road is put through straight, they get back, or I guess they get the land in between, the part of the circle that's on their side. That creates several problems. And I don't understand exactly how that works. Who owns the land? You know, the plot plans only show up to the subdivision street as, well, like in this case, the circle. So I don't know that they own the land beyond. In some cases, people own to the middle of the road if you give up the easement. In other cases, the town owns the land the road is on, and it continues to own it. But if they're on a circle, in some cases, they have a reduced frontage requirement under our rules, or under the bylaw.
Yeah.
And when it gets straightened out, what happens? Because now they don't have that. Now it's a straight line, and their land, you know, do they have to go to the ZBA and get a variance? And in any case, whether or not that comes up, just the frontage along a curved line is greater than the frontage along a straight road with the same sidelines. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's an interesting situation, Bob. I remember looking at that in some context not too long, sometime within the last few months, looking at that and looking at measurements around the circle and the straight lines. Don't remember exactly why I was looking at that, but I do remember looking at that and kind of coming up with the same question you're coming up with. Is, you know, it's all well and good as long as that circle exists, and the zoning bylaw does define frontage around a cul-de-sac like that. But what happens when you straighten it out? What happens when you drive a road through from the circle to a adjoining property, or even, you know, farther onto that property? What happens to the frontage? What happens to the lot lines? What happens to the frontage? It's an interesting question, and it deserves some thought. Whether that affects the subdivision rules it's not clear, but it may.
I think certainly I'd be happier if I understood it, and we may have to have someone explain to us who owns what and how these processes would work or do work. I can think of 2 or 3 cases where it's come up.
So
What's the is it Bull Meadow, where there was a cul-de-sac and now they've built the road through? Is
Oh,
that the
yeah.
right name?
I think that was.
Um,
I think that was.
and I asked about this then, but I think that there was enough land and you know, there wasn't really an issue with something built on a minimum frontage at the cul-de-sac, so it was all right. The one that I remember, the first one that I remember, is there was a small subdivision off of Glen Street, away when we go to.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You turn off of Old Westboro Road. Is it Old Westboro? And you go up Glen Street, just a lot or two, and then you go in, and that was a semi-finished. That was like a half-finished 5-6 house subdivision with a cul-de-sac when I came on the board, and it had been abandoned more or less. And after quite a lot of years, then maybe Leclerc came along, got the land to the east of it, and built that whole subdivision there and connected it through. And you had houses on that cul-de-sac. And I remember then this came up there. And there's a third case. I just had it in mind. I've forgotten where it has come up.
Yeah.
Not too long ago. So I'd like like to understand that, whether or not it has to keep us from getting these rules
Yeah,
approved, I don't know.
I'd be interested if there was any, case law around that would be known. I'm not saying we should have council do research on it, but I would be interested if council knew something offhand that there is case law, even if we don't know the answer to the question yet, just knowing that there's something that dictates how this should work.
I could take a look at if other communities have something similar, or if there's any case law in terms of that.
It's got to come up, although I don't know how often cul-de-sacs get eliminated and the road put on through. But it ought to be the same problem anywhere. I just would like to be sure that if we need to do anything in rules to maybe leave groundwork laid around this possibility, that we do it.
Yeah, it'd be worth learning what we can about the topic as how it might influence our subdivision rules.
Yep. And then your question, the last two items I had are nits that you can look at.
So, anybody else on the board? Anything else you wanted to raise at this point, Bob? Anybody else have anything?
No, those other two, don't worry about. That's all that I got. My head got full.
Yeah.
Yep.
570 pages, isn't it?
My
of
only
fine print.
continued comment is this is a very good work, Dave, and I appreciate all the time you put into this. I have really no more comments because of how much we've already discussed it.
Oh, on the first page, you don't show the thing about. They list the paragraphs that have been changed on the cover page.
Ah.
I don't know how you're going to do that. Just say everything, because you're changing numbers and whatnot. So that's going to be a headache.
Yes, I think rather than attempt to list all the sections that are changed for this revision, I had written that companion document, the change summary, which does sort of identify the sections in which significant changes. I haven't, it doesn't list all the sections where periods and commas and things like that were done, but it does list the sections where there are some non-trivial changes. I had anticipated sort of publishing that as a companion document to this. It could be made into an appendix of this, although I'm not sure that that's the best way to do it. But a record with some detail as to the substantive changes that were made.
We might want to get a little guidance on whether there's a formal requirement for even putting that on the cover page.
Yeah, I suspect there is no formal requirement for that. That it was done as a convenience for the reader, because the changes were affecting relatively few sections.
Right. It occurred to me, is it the zoning bylaw that has essentially an appendix?
Yes.
Which lists the changes, and maybe that's or outlines the changes. Maybe that would be neater. You're running out of space on the cover page anyway. In fact, you can move the whole thing. Maybe.
Yes, that might end up being more appropriate as an appendix with a sort of a change log.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Yeah. I think it's really helpful to have other eyes looking this over, because you'll see something that I didn't see. Like I said before, I very much appreciate the time anybody puts in to scrutinize this. I know Chris put in quite a bit of time and had a whole shitload of, excuse me, sorry about the language, a whole pile of changes, or which there were a few of those were just questions, which I really should answer them for you. I've written
Sometimes
down some answers for them, I just haven't sent it to you.
Sometimes I pontificate more in, in terms of future things to be considered, but
So, with a few of the changes that we've discussed tonight, I suppose our best course of action would be to see if we can't come back to the next meeting with a further discussion of the items that we've kind of raised as issues here. And if at that point we're satisfied, then maybe we can put this out into the public process. Ultimately, it has to go to a public hearing, formal vote by the board to adopt after the public hearing, and then file with the town clerk and the registry, and then we'll be good to go. So I'll aim to have another update in 2 weeks, if at all possible. Otherwise, as soon as we can get that all done. Anything else for tonight on subdivision rules?
Anecdotally, for the public hearing, is the entire town considered a legal abutter?
We don't send out abutter notices for this. We just advertise a public hearing.
Yeah.
And
That's what I suspected.
The abutter notices are for special permits. I don't know, do we do abutter notices for site plan?
yes.
Okay, but that's for people within 300 feet.
Arguably, the entire town is an abutter in the sense of being a party with some potential interest in this.
Yeah.
But we are not obligated to send notices out to the entire town.
That would be wasteful. I would
Yes.
think.
It is sufficient to publish the hearing notice in a newspaper of general circulation.
Yeah, now about that. You know what I'm gonna say, so never mind.
And
We're
I
we're
do-
running short of newspapers newspapers.
I do believe the town charter defines the term newspaper of general circulation to include the town website.
That was an addition, of course.
Yes, we did that relatively recently in the charter.
Yeah, but I think that was adding that as an additional place you could post.
Yes,
Not that
not a
it was,
replacement.
not that it satisfied the newspaper in general circulation. You still have to have the printed requirement. I think that comes out of state law, doesn't it?
Yes.
Actually, I suppose the website does to some degree too.
Anyway,
Yes, we will cross that bridge when we come to it.
Mhm.
Okay, moving on then. Under general business, we have some bills.
I move that we approve the bills and authorize the planner to sign on behalf of the board.
Second,
Moved and seconded that the bills be approved and planner be authorized to sign. And just discussion of the motion. Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call. Bob,
aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabu,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We have minutes of previous meetings.
I move that we approve the minutes as drafted with any amendments during discussion.
Second,
Moved and seconded that the minutes be approved with any amendments that might come up during discussion. And I don't believe,
I didn't notice anything.
I had one question, Dave.
yes,
Did we not talk about the whole thing would come back to the planning board in December, some time frame? If the acquisition, merger, whatever was going to happen, if that didn't happen, we talked about it and it got clarified that they would need to come back. It's not a 1-year extension for the existing party.
what do we remember about that?
He's asking whether or not we said that it would be looked at again in December if the deal didn't go through. The extension. If the deal
the
doesn't,
extension
this is the marijuana.
in Centec Park.
I thought we just said a year, but I don't remember exactly.
Yeah,
I'd have to look at the tape.
Yeah, I can go back to the video, and add language as needed. My recollection, and I'd rather go back to the video because my
Yeah.
recollection can be wrong. But my recollection was that the board approved for the 1 year extension, and left the the ownership, if that were to not go through, they left that silent.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I want to say that there was basically two parts to the modification. One was the 1 year extension, one was the change in ownership. And the change in ownership is the one that had the condition that basically the December 31st deadline, that if the merger was not completed by December 31st, the ownership portion of the permit would revert to Nature's Remedy. The 1 year extension would remain.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, that's what I kind of remember.
I recollect something differently. I can also check the video again, but I thought it was going to come back. It was not a blanket 1 year extension for Nature's Remedy, and I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think what we just heard was the pretty much where we ended up, but
Yeah.
you
I
can
don't
check.
remember Rashomon.
So should we hold off on that set of minutes?
Yeah, given that the best approach to resolving the question would be to review the video, it's probably most appropriate for us to table the motion to approve the minutes until such time as the video can be reviewed and the question answered.
So just withdraw the motion formally then?
Yep, you could withdraw it.
I'll
provided
withdraw
seconder
the
agrees to
motion.
Withdraw.
You withdraw your second.
Second, well, no, did I second? No,
Yes.
I didn't.
Issued it.
Oh, okay, well,
Withdraw your
if I
second.
did, I do.
All right, we'll consider this item to be punted to the next meeting.
Even if I didn't, I do.
Alrighty then. Anything in correspondence that caught anybody's eye?
Yes. The cell coverage mapping.
Do what?
So, I thought that was there before.
Maybe there's correspondence that,
It was on the first page of the correspondence when I looked at it.
The
Oh.
survey.
cell coverage mapping. I don't know that tells us anything, that we have any concern about that. So people are gonna be doing some mapping of cell coverage somehow or other. Not our problem.
Yeah, I think it would benefit us as the planning board to, when this actually comes around more and we are aware of it, to at least give media and the public just a heads up that they can self-report down, low coverage areas. And they do mention in the letter that we could always, if we wanted to help them as a town, we could reach out to them, but I don't think that is up to us to really say.
Now, as long as they're happy with it, we can somehow let people know that not too many people are gonna notice one way or the other.
Yeah, so in the letter they do note that using the social media channels, that they have a web-based survey platform for voluntarily submitting dead zone data into an interactive map. I have not reached out and asked for a link to that survey. Certainly, if the board is interested, I can reach out and get some more information in terms of what the town's role could be. And I'm sure that would put us on a list to have the results shared. It says in the fall when that's completed. So if the board is interested, I'm happy to reach out. And
Why not?
I'll say for me, I'm interested in knowing more, like how to report that and to see results that affect Grafton.
Are they gonna make the results available?
Uh,
Often that kind of information is proprietary. Certainly when individual cell providers,
They, in their letter, they said they'd be more than happy to share the results, but I don't know if that's contingent on the town helping to conduct it. So
well, let's see what we can do.
Yep.
I know where those dead zones are.
in street.
Yeah, there's one from Stowe Road to the barn, the former DPW barn. That's a cone of silence in there.
Okay.
All right.
that's all I saw.
I don't think there was much else in correspondence.
No, I don't think, I don't think I saw anything else that caught my eye.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any reports from planning board representatives on town committees
We
and
skipped staff
CMRPC?
report.
Did I skip? Yeah, I did skip
Yeah.
staff report.
I
Yeah,
do-
we don't need a staff report.
I do have a brief one. We talked about Complete Streets, a couple of the other big projects I wanted to give an update. So we did have our first kickoff meeting for the hazard mitigation plan update. The committee for that has been brought together. We went through some of the initial stages, kind of looking at the process and the meeting requirements for that committee. We'll be updating that plan and going through potential hazards in town related to weather. We're working with VHB and our consultant for that. So we went through some worksheets that she had, and there's additional process that'll be gone through. So I'll have more updates as we continue that process. Additionally, the local rapid recovery plan, we are wrapping up that project. We've done our interviews. Again, that's the plan looking specifically at North Grafton and the New England Village area, right around Perry Hill Park and Washington Mills. So we've completed our interviews. We met with subject matter experts on some of the potential projects. The consultant CARP Strategies is going to be having a final draft report sent over to us on the 20th. I will be meeting with the select board and CARP Strategies to present that plan to them on the 21st. In our budgeted hours from that kind of program, we do not have hours for a planning board presentation, but on the 20th, once I receive that draft report, I will circulate it to the board members, and then I'd be happy to do a brief presentation on that project for the board at our upcoming meeting. We do have an October 8th deadline for DHCD, or sorry, not DHCD, for the state to submit that for their approval. So it is a very kind of quick paced timeline as it's been envisioned from the beginning. So from that draft to finalizing, it'll be a very short window. But I would like to get it before the planning board for their comments. So as soon as I get my hands on it, I'll pass it off. And obviously, in advance of the meeting, if there's any comments or questions, feel free to pass them along to me, and I'll forward them to the consultant. We don't need to wait for the presentation. So that's
That
all
it
I
for
had.
staff report?
That is,
Okay.
thank you.
Now let me skip back to where I was trying to go prematurely. Reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC, if there are any.
I had one quick update from the library building committee. There have been some delays due to the overall COVID situation, raw material not being available, and hence other things getting delayed. So there are going to be further conversations to understand what could be the realistic opening of the library in all its glory. So I'm not in a position to share any additional details, but we'll know more in the subsequent weeks.
As far as you're aware so far, they're still on track to have the official opening with the ribbon cutting.
That's the part that part of the meeting started at 7.
Okay.
I came over.
Anything else?
Well, I'll just say, I was part of the quarterly CMRPC meeting last Thursday night, and the program was announcing and introducing the beginning of work on a new regional plan. They're looking to do quite an extensive effort to do that over a period of time, with all sorts of interaction with everyone and so on. So that may be kind of interesting to keep an eye on over the forthcoming time. It's been a while since we did one.
I don't think anybody got that.
Anybody have anything else? Are there any other items which may lawfully come before the board?
I move we adjourn.
Second,
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. Call for a roll call vote. Bob?
Aye.
Linda?
aye.
Prabhu?
Hi.
Justin?
Aye.
Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We are adjourned.